Well, the World Health Organization has updated the official narrative about the Wu flu, the virus that it's hard to believe, a year ago was just starting to emerge from Wuhan, China. Back then, it was before the WHO had even gotten involved and given it its very, silly and neutral-sounding name, the coronavirus disease 19. And before that, the virus, which I think they still call it this, the sudden acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus 2. I think that was the original name of the virus. None of those ever rolled off the tongue quite like Wu flu. Well, as some of you might have heard a few weeks ago, China finally allowed the World Health Organization to visit Wuhan to try and investigate the origins of the Wu flu. And you might think, well, gee, it's been a year, over a year, if you consider that, we think that now that the outbreak started like in October of 2019, what is it that the WHO's going to find there? Are they really going to be able to find any evidence that this was covered up by China, and that they did their best to tamp down on this and to spread disinformation, to do whatever they could to make themselves look good, to the world, to the greater world? Because, I mean, we know that for a long time China was, denying that this was going on, and anyone in China who tried to leak that, hey, we have a big problem here, the outbreak of this virus, and the rest of the world should be aware of this, those people were silenced and disappeared and shut up. You would think that, oh, gee, China must have been covering something up, right? And that's what the WHO's investigation would have been, there to try and figure out. Well, now the WHO is presenting some preliminary results, and lo and behold, I guess people like me who are just crazy conspiracy theorists, because the WHO, that independent international body that is funded largely by China, they have determined that, in fact, the Chinese official narrative is 100% correct, and anyone who denies the official Chinese government narrative at this point is a crazy conspiracy theorist who is anti-science. Because if we follow the science, it will tell us that the virus originated from some non-human species. It was in an animal, and it jumped to humans, probably as a result or probably something to do with that wet market that we heard so much about. It's because those nasty Chinese people in Wuhan were eating too much bat soup. And that is why, in order to combat this virus, the Chinese government have put the people of Wuhan on a strict chicken noodle diet. Now, in all seriousness, it is not at all unsurprising that the World Health Organization is regurgitating the Chinese state narrative, whether it's correct or not. Which I have a tendency to, from the beginning back then, I did not believe China's official narrative. However, it would have been impossible in my eyes for the WHO to come out and present anything that wasn't, identical to what China's been saying. And even if they wanted to go in there and there was any hint of honesty on the part of the WHO, they wouldn't be able to find anything anyway, because China's had a year to clean this whole thing up and cover everything up. If, for example, there was some kind of accident, and this virus was maybe something that was being studied at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which I believe, because there's 2 labs in Wuhan, had been cited in the past by Western whistleblowers as having, poor security. Let's say that, because I'm not saying that this happened, not at all, because then I would be spreading disinformation. Because whatever the WHO says goes, and, Xi Jinping would never lie to us. But if, for example, there had been some kind of a leakage of a virus that was being studied at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, as a result of poor practices there, China's had a year to clean that up, and they could have, made it so that lab is now very safe and that won't happen again, and there will be no evidence that it ever happened to begin with. And at that point, if, at the lab where the WHO people come to and they see the lab and they go, wow, this place looks really safe, you guys have really good sanitation procedures, then the only thing they would have left to conclude is that, well, it must be this terrible wet market down the street that caused this outbreak. Wherever this virus came from, it's not the Chinese government's fault. It's the fault of the Chinese people who have these barbaric eating habits. obviously, the ordinary citizens of Wuhan are the real culprits. Ultimately, if anyone's hoping for any sort of objective study of the history of this whole outbreak of the global pandemic, you're not going to get one ever. We will never know the truth. The Chinese government would not let us know what is true and what is false, for better or for worse. For them. Whether it's something that makes them look bad or not, they're going to cover things up. That is just the nature of states like China. Had this virus originated in any number of other countries, they probably would have done something similar. They would have wanted to craft a narrative that made them look as good as possible. That's why the Chinese government now is even, they're trying to pin this, to some extent on saying that the virus, was foodborne and that it came from frozen food that was shipped in from outside China. Because it doesn't matter. No matter how much they stretch the story, they're going to keep stretching it to make themselves look better and better and make their enemies look worse and worse. And so sadly, in history, we're not going to know exactly what happened. But we can infer some things, and I can't infer those things on YouTube because I don't want to get Thanos'd. I don't want my channel to get nuked because I do have, I still think that I have things that I can say on this channel that are within YouTube's parameters for now, to where it's more worth my while to stay on YouTube, to keep this platform rather than lose it. Although with that said, I do have a BitChute, and if my YouTube gets nuked, I'll also start a Rumble because BitChute doesn't work very well. I think it's the responsibility of those of us who followed the situation from, close to the beginning, back last January. We're following this issue, who remember, the facts that were coming out, the news that as it was developing, before there was an official narrative that was crafted, before the history books were written, so to speak, regarding the origins of this virus. I think that it is my responsibility and the responsibility of others to try and balance out the official narrative by offering the alternatives that may or may not be more likely, because of course the possibility that this virus was a product of gain-of-function research, I think is something very important for human history. It is potentially a good advertisement against gain-of-function research. And for those of you who don't know, that's essentially where where scientists make GMO viruses in a lab that are as effective as possible, and then they sort of release them in a lab-controlled environment on organisms to study how much more dangerous they are. You have Frankenstein's monster, essentially, is what gain-of-function research is all about. And whether this virus was the product of that or not, obviously, if it was, that's something that the Chinese would want to keep under wraps. It's also probably something that a lot of other countries would like to keep under wraps, because if it were revealed that this was going on in China, then there would be questions about it going on in other countries like the United States, and I'm sure none of them want to cease that kind of research. So I guess overall, keep an open mind. Don't get sucked into these narratives, because sometimes, even with for somebody like me, you just get drowned in all of this official narrative and all of this media disinformation. It really becomes hard to parse the facts for yourself, and it becomes very, very difficult to keep the truth alive, even if you in your own mind. And if you can accomplish that much, if you can keep the truth alive in your own mind, well then, I think that in an age of deceit, it is again the responsibility of people like myself and many others to try and keep the truth alive in the minds of others as well. And to end on a positive note, institutions like the World Health Organization have never been more distrusted, in recent decades than they are now. The decline in trust in institutions in the United States specifically is, one of the most positive trends that I have been monitoring. Because if deceitful institutions like the World Health Organization or, organs of the United States government or the Chinese government or, these other powerful entities throughout the world, if they lose power over the thoughts of ordinary people, then, that is what their power is. That is the essence of their power. All of these material things like bombs and soldiers and weapons are not so useful if they can't overwhelmingly compel people mentally. No matter how many guns you have, you're not going to be able to convince a world that believes that this virus was the result of gain-of-function research, which again, I'm not saying that that's the case. Not saying that at all. YouTube, don't delete this. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just giving a hypothetical. If the world believed that, you're not going to be able to use guns to make them believe that this virus was, foodborne and was the result of people eating too much bat soup or an unsanitary wet market. And this principle, of course, applies in any other context of corporate or government disinformation. So, with that said, if you get anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe because I do upload every day and I'd hate to have you miss one. So, I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.